And we're live. And it's not May the 4th anymore.
May the 11th be with you.
Yeah, May the 11th be with you. It's got a ring to it.
It really does.
I did see one the other day for Mando fans. That the new thing is, this is the May.
This is the May.
Yeah.
What's Manda?
So there's a guy. The whole
Mandalorian.
thing is like, this is the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the new thing now that the Mandalorian is here is, this is the May.
That's dumb.
Which I can get behind it.
That's dumb. Let's not repeat that one again.
All right. Well, I probably will repeat it.
Oh, Jeremy, you got to show him your shirt real quick. Just turn slightly to the camera.
Any Petra fans?
Yeah.
Flash. That's Flash from the past right there.
Yeah. So people listening to the podcast, listening and not viewing, again, you're missing out.
How old is that shirt?
Oh, it's...
Did you get it like in the 80s or 90s?
No, I had it made because you can't find it.
I was going to
today.
say, dude.
You had it made?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Dude.
had it made.
That would be pretty unique if you actually came across like an original Petra shirt.
Yeah, we have a friend out in Florida that we have a couple things in common, but one of the things is love for Petra, and so they were like, we got these Petra shirts, we make them just because we love Petra, and I'm like, oh man, I'd love to get my hands on one of those.
Now,
Nice.
is that their original graphic, or did you guys design the graphic?
No,
too?
that's their original.
Okay,
graphic,
yeah.
So it's legit in that way.
Yeah.
No, that's
so you're
legit,
ripping
man.
off a trademark, probably.
Probably, yeah.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
just don't ever preach in it. That would be dumb.
That would be bad, right? But I say because it has a cross in it, I think it's legit. I can preach in that.
Yeah, totally.
Chad won't let me preach in Crocs though. He has a
that's-
thing against preaching.
that is
No.
that is not
Yeah,
the way.
That's
That's not the
That is not the way.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not the way. I
No.
agree. not the way.
I've done it. It's
David and
super
I
comfy.
have some strong feelings about Crocs.
Yes, we do. Are we men or are we mice?
Right.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
was gonna go something other than mice, but we'll go with that.
Are yours camouflaged?
They're not camo. No, but
They're straight black.
they're brown, but they're like slipper Crocs, so they have like the furry inside.
Oh,
so
dude.
your feet just thank you at the end of an hour-long sermon.
They thank you.
Yeah, your feet thank you. Yeah, you preach in Crocs, your feet
But
thank
to
you.
your people.
That's about 50-50.
Yeah, exactly, dude. I would rebuke you on that if I was sitting there
Yeah,
like
oh,
this
yeah.
dude just preaching. Like, how irreverent is that? Like, how can you proclaim the word of God and wear something?
If I
like
were a
that?
visitor to that church, I would have left before the service was over.
Probably like-
I would have saw that. I'm like, I'm out.
Yep.
Probably Sermon on the Mount. Christ was probably in sandals.
No, don't go there. don't go. Christ doesn't do Crocs.
Sandals are different than Crocs.
Oh, so I could preach in Tivas?
Yes. No.
Well,
No?
Flow hose.
Birkenstocks,
Oh,
maybe.
Birkenstocks.
Maybe.
No. No. That's a hard no too, dude. That's a hard boycott.
Yeah, I don't know that I could do Birkenstocks.
Yeah, you'll notice that Pastor Brent is not here, and just by way of coincidence, he also wears Crocs, and he's not here at the moment. So
See?
Yeah.
I like that guy. I knew I always liked that guy.
I don't know if he wears Crocs anymore. I think that
maybe we've cured him of it.
we've shaken him pretty hard.
I hope
Where
so.
I think he's kind of shying away from.
Yeah.
There's some conviction setting in.
That's good.
See,
Yeah.
when you live in Madras, Crocs are just now getting there. And so they're like the cool thing.
I was gonna say, dude, in Madras,
Yeah.
like there probably aren't Birkenstocks. There probably
No.
aren't Crocs. They're like that's a whole different
Yeah.
cultural deal up there.
Yeah.
So
We should probably now that we're a good 4 minutes in, probably
Introduce this
tell
guy?
people who Jeremy
yeah,
is.
does anyone know this guy?
Who's this guy sitting in with us? So you can tell us about yourself, Jeremy. But I'll just say, like, Jeremy's one of my closest friends, and we've been buddies for a long time. And anyway, he's on the podcast today to talk about church planting, and we'll get into that more in a minute. But maybe
Yeah.
2 minutes. Who's Jeremy Green?
2 minutes. So who's Jeremy Green? Redeemed by Christ, thankfully. And that really is all that I am and who I am. I live in Madras. My family and I moved to Madras in 5 years ago now. I've been working there for about 9 years. And came out of Prineville previous to Madras, where Chad and I got acquainted and met and did some life together over there. And he went south and I went north.
I don't know if that's an upgrade or not. Going
yeah.
from Prineville to Madras.
I don't. I born and raised in Bend, and that was one place that I never saw myself living, because Madras was always just the town you drove through to get to,
Right.
like Portland,
Yeah.
And
On the way to somewhere.
and
Yeah.
here we are 5 years in and loving it, loving everything about the community. But yeah, so I'm a pastor. I'm one of I'm one pastor of a couple of a church plant in Madras, and it's not really a plant anymore. I don't know how long it has to exist before it's not
Right.
a plant anymore. But yeah, I'm pastoring a church there that's
7
been there
years.
for 5 years.
7 years.
That's
7 years, is that the
that's
number?
the official time.
Oh,
frame.
because that's the
I'm just
number
saying
of
that.
perfection.
I don't know. I'm just saying that. So
Yeah, the
Sounds
Hebrews
right.
Roots movement would have
it's no
something to
longer
say
a
about
plant.
that.
Yeah.
7 years.
That is an interesting question. When is a church plant no longer a plant? You refer to as a plant.
Yeah.
We should figure that out.
Well, I think 7 is where they usually say, like, you're going to know if, like, a church is going to succeed or fail, like if it's going to continue or fold by year 7. I don't know where they get that number.
Yeah, I feel like you
might
know
just be an
sooner than
average. So I feel like that's kind of like the cutoff. If you've made it to year 7, you're rocking, dude. You're bona fide. It's just, yeah.
Well, we're right on the cusp then.
Yeah.
Couple more years. But yeah, so known Chad for a long time. We've worked together outside of the church. We've worked together in the church.
Yeah, kind of all areas of life have intersected for you and me.
Yeah, for a long time.
And our families.
Yep.
And I got the privilege of being a part of the church plant from a distance.
You did.
From the beginning up until recently when I kind of hung up my hat there, and maybe we'll get into that. But anyway, so we're going to talk about that today and church planting and kind of maybe what you've learned and what's worked and what hasn't and
Excellent. Sounds
stuff
good.
like that.
Yeah.
I'm selfishly excited because this is my favorite subject.
Church planting.
Oh yeah, church planning and seeing new gospel works happen in new places is like fascinating to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's a biblical thing, so I think we should be excited about
That's
it. right?
awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe just to dive right in, how did you come to the decision to plant a church?
Oh man.
In Madras of all places.
Yeah, and
In Madras
too.
yeah.
That's the bigger question.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I don't know that there was there was definitely a cognizant decision made at some point. But I had found myself, my place of employment had moved from Prineville into Madras, and
There you go.
so I'd been
Which, for those that don't know, is just kind of the next town over.
Yeah,
so,
it's
so
just-
not a great distance
they're
away.
like 30 minutes apart, 40 minutes apart. And when I was in Prineville, my wife and I and our kids had lived there for many years, and I was a member of a church there and was raised up within that church to be an elder. And so I kind of, had some preaching opportunities and served as an elder for almost 3 years, I think, there in Prineville. And then my job changed, and I ended up working in Madras. And so,
Were you at Calvary?
yeah,
That's where you served as an elder?
where I served as a Calvary Chapel.
Yep.
Kirk County. Yep. And so my job changed, and so 3 years I was commuting back and forth between Madras and Prineville. While my family, lived in Prineville, I was spending 8 to 10 hours a day in Madras, and so multiple factors really. It's just, and the more time I spent in Madras, the more time I was getting connected to that community, and really finding it difficult to pastor in a community that I was spending, or to pastor in a community that I was only in the evenings and on weekends, right? And so I was getting more and more established in Madras by the nature of my job, and so in that I started to ask the question: should my family and I move to Madras? And if we were to move to Madras, the first question that came to our mind, and I think it's the right question, is what church would we attend? And so when I started to do an in-depth study of all of the churches in Madras, what kind of continued to come to mind was that there are quite a few churches. I don't know that it's as churched as, say, the community of Prineville. I think per capita Prineville has more churches than Madras does.
Interesting tidbit real quick. At one point, Prineville had the most churches per capita in the nation.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah, back in the 80s.
Where'd you hear that? It's all those cowboys and that country music.
Common
those
knowledge,
guns.
Yeah. He got it off of Wikipedia.
Anyway.
But anyway, yeah. So Madras probably is, unchurched in a way that some of the other communities in Central Oregon is not, I think. And I think that's a fair statement if you look at it.
This isn't
data behind
racist, but is it very Catholic?
The community of Madras?
Yeah. Are there more Catholic,
Yeah.
more of a Catholic presence?
I think so.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, there's more Hispanics there than most places in Central Oregon.
That's
so.
the other thing.
Yeah, talk about the demographics for just a second
Yeah,
of
so the
Madras.
community of Madras is the most diverse of any of the communities in Central Oregon,
Yep.
and so it's a third Latinx, it's a third Caucasian, it's a third Native. So it's very diverse, yeah,
Because you got Warm Springs right up the road.
Yep, Warm Springs. Yep, and so anyway, just spending all that time there, it was I was feeling the strain of basically spending the majority of my day, every day there, while my family was in Prineville, and I was, one of the pastors, one of the elders at that church in Prineville. And so I just started to do an in-depth look at the churches that existed, and there's a lot of them. But what I found, and what I found to be true, based on my convictions of the Word, was that only a couple of them, of the several, were biblical. We're preaching the Bible. We're not compromising on the Word of God and Orthodox Christianity. And so it was like, oh, so there's like a need for Bible preaching churches in this community. And so I started to sort of pray about that and lean into that a little bit. Had some discussions with the elders at the church that we were at in Prineville, and had some discussions with Chad, who was then at that point was already in La Pine, and some discussions with the close men in my life that, discipleship groups and types of things. And it was funny because the first time I kind of was like, maybe we're supposed to go to Madras and just move there and just start making disciples, plant a church, things like that. And so I went to one of my closest friends there in Prineville. I said, I think we're supposed to do this. Would you? But I don't really want to go alone. Would you want to go with us? And he said, no way, never. And I was like,
no.
Well, okay, maybe that's of the Lord. Maybe we're not supposed to go,
Yeah.
So prayed about another month or so. You don't have to spend a lot of time in prayer about this, I think, when you see in the Word that this is the call as believers to go, proclaim the gospel, make disciples. So I think we can spend too much time on it.
There are so many times
that.
when I'm going to pray about that.
Yeah.
Is an excuse to drag your feet.
Right.
Yeah. And so the Lord had conveniently moved me to Madras through my employment, right? And over those 3 years, there was becoming a strain in working and living in two different places. And so, I didn't need to spend a lot of time praying about it. If the Lord had called me to be a pastor already and equipped the church that I was in Prineville with enough elders to meet the needs of that congregation, my exiting and going to plant a church wasn't going to be, taking away anything from that church. It actually creates opportunities for the Lord to raise up new elders there, and He's done that. And so, I went to my closest buddy, and I was just like, "You want to go with us?" And he's like, "No way, never." And I'm like, "All right." So, about a month later, I came back and said, "We're going. We're going to do this with you, without you. We're going to go." And
so were you? I mean, you're kind of getting there, but were you sent technically by somebody? Were you covered, or were you self-appointed? Like, oh, I'm just going to go do this, or like, what happened?
Yeah, I got a download from God, and no, I'm just kidding.
God told me to tell you I'm coming.
Yeah, no, it was very biblical. We try to be very biblical in our approach to this. So like I said, I was talking with the close men in my life.
Yeah.
I was talking with the elders that I was serving alongside of that were also my elders, right, as well. I was talking with Chad, who'd been one of my pastors, been one of my elders. And so there was definite there was a seeking of counsel from godly men in my life.
Sure.
Do you affirm this? Is this wisdom? Do you think this is of the Lord? And then in that conversation with the elders that I was serving along, they just said, this is what we see in the Word, and so yes, if this is what the Lord would have, we are happy to send you and provide sort of that head covering for a season until the Lord would establish and raise up local elders there. And so long story short there, though, that the buddy that I was talking about initially, Jason is his name, he came back about 3 months later and said, no, we're going to go too. And so we literally put our houses on the market at the same time. Jason and Kayla, they came with us. They quit their jobs. We sold our house. They sold their house. We all moved to Madras, ended up living next door to each other in God's providence, and moved in within less than 30 days apart from each other. So it was just sort of like, we talk about God things, and it was just like the pieces were falling into place. And so, which I mentioned that specifically because at about year 2, maybe year 2.5 into this, there were seasons where my wife and I were really starting to struggle with the whole plant and just the impact of life, of raising kids, working jobs, trying to lead and plant church, where we used the manner in which the Lord moved us there as opportunities to look back at the faithfulness of Him and His hand in that, and that gave us encouragement that we were
Sure.
we
Put
were
some wind
where
in
we
your sails.
needed to be. Yeah, you know what I mean? And so we didn't have
because
to
of what was
question.
already done,
Right.
Because of the way everything had moved.
Just and so, and I don't want to over spiritualize it or anything like that, but God moves. He's sovereign. He works His plan, and so
Sure.
and so we really seen His hand in all of that, and so that's really the story about how we ended up in Madras. And people ask you, did you go there to plant a church? And we kind of said, well, we went there to make disciples, to love God, love people, and out of that, with hopes and intention that a church, a group of believers would form that we could then live life alongside of in Madras, proclaiming the gospel, being salt and light in the community. And
So having said that, when you showed up, did you show up with a name? Did you already know it was going to be called The Gathering? So you did show up to plant a church.
yeah, right. So there was intentionality in.
Okay.
There was intentionality in, like, we spent a season, probably 6 months. Chad was a part of this, walking through, like, what's a faith statement going to look like? What's our theology? What's our doctrine going to look like? And what's biblical, like, in this endeavor? Because, again, we didn't go out just solo. We didn't just self-appoint and go. We had a head covering. So we had, elders in Prineville, and we had Chad and Tony at the time. And we said, we want to do this alongside and underneath a head covering of Ascending Church to ensure accountability, to ensure correction if and when needed, to ensure there was prayer for us, and there would be men that would literally rush to Madras in time of need to sort of hold our hands up. And so there was a lot of intentionality in that way. So we had a name. We didn't, we had a name. Shortly after we got there, we got a website and things like that.
So where were you meeting too? Or did you look for like a public place to meet right away?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
we just started meeting in our home.
Yeah. Okay.
And we just, I think the very first Sunday it was our family, Jason and Kayla, their family, and then one other couple that we had known from Prineville that lived in that area that said, hey, we'll come and join you guys.
So this was your core group. This was basically your plant. These were believers that were intentional in what you guys were doing. Okay.
That's right.
Well, one thing that I appreciated too, to jump in, is that you took a long time, 6 months to a year before getting to that point.
We did.
Of kind of meeting with your core group, and you had another person that was part of the core group that moved on after a period of time. So you had a few folks, and you pastored those people, for probably a year leading up to you all moving to Madras.
Yep.
And I think that was really cool to see that unfold and to see your intentionality. It wasn't just on a whim, hey, we're going to go to Madras tomorrow and do this thing.
Right.
That there was a lot of prep that went into it, a lot of prayer that went into it, a lot of, shepherding on your part of those people about, here's why we're going to go do what we're going to go do, and here's what it's going to look like.
Yeah. By the grace of God, He led us through it, right? And we didn't know what we were doing, but we just said, if we're going to do this, we got to get real close. We got to know each other inside and out. And so, like you said, for a year, we met weekly, going through a study on, I forget the name of it, but it was a gospel study. So it's like how to be gospel fluent. So it's like the point in going to Madras was to make disciples. So in a church plant, you're going to see some transfer growth. That's normal, I think.
Yeah, you can't really help that.
You can't
even
help
as much
it.
as you try to discourage it.
Right.
We used to be mean. Like when people would come from another church to visit, we'd be like, "Thanks for coming. Now go back."
Right.
Like we were horrible.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, like God moves people around sometimes, and it's okay.
Yes. And I think it's a valid question though. Like, why are you moving one church to this church?
No,
so we'd
that
ask those questions.
It's a valid question.
And so for the first year, the year before we went there, we spent a whole year study through what it looks like to be gospel fluent. So how do we proclaim the gospel day in, day out in just the normal activities of life?
Right.
So that was the main tactic of growth, right?
That was the growth.
So it was going to
model.
be like lifestyle evangelism.
Yep.
Right. Rather than we're going to get on social media.
Yep.
And we're going to blow this thing up.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
Right.
We didn't go in with banners. We didn't go in with a launch Sunday. We didn't go in.
You
we
didn't
didn't
have any shirts.
We didn't have a shirt. We didn't have hats.
You got a
Stickers?
Pedra shirt made, but you didn't get
stickers
gathering
around?
shirts made?
We didn't. We still don't do Easter eggs on Easter.
Don't go there.
Yeah, let's not talk about that one, dude. We feel we're still trying to shower that off of us from last year.
And so we just went, and we would, as this small group of us, there was 5 adults, and I would say, like, the goal isn't to invite people to church. The goal is to invite people into our homes.
I loved that approach.
To our dinner table, get to know people really, authentic. And through that, you're going to find, are they a non-believer? Maybe they're a believer that's struggling in their faith. Right. Maybe they're a mature believer, and they're going to be able to speak into your life in this process. But let's get to know one another, and then through those relationships that form and grow, then it's like it becomes a natural thing that you start covenanting together in sort of what the church looks like. Right. Meeting on Sundays and doing life throughout the week. And I'm not talking like, a men's group on Tuesday morning and a Bible study on Wednesday. But, like, my kids are playing football on Saturday. You want to come and cheer on my boys, and can we do the same with you? And, you've got a project at your house that needs done. My boys and I will bring our hammers and nails. Just everyday gritty life in the trenches. And that's been our growth model. And it started from day one. There was intentionality in that. And that's been our growth model for 5 years now. Nice. We still don't advertise. Probably 2/3 of the community don't know we exist.
Yeah.
When new churches come to town,
Yeah.
when new churches come to town, they'll get a write-up in the newspaper. We've never had a write-up in the newspaper. The newspaper's never reached out and been like, "Hey, you're a new church. We want to interview." It's like, and I'm okay with that, right?
Yep.
Our growth plan was through relationship, not making a big organization out of.
I love that you didn't go to town to show up with like the show.
No,
because that's a lot of kind of church planting.
That's exactly
organizations or books will tell you, like, here are all the components that you need, and programs and hipster pastors, and
then there's a launch date, and there's a build up to the launch date. There's a countdown for the launch date.
Right.
You know what I mean? And a bomb goes off when the launch date comes, and it's just, and everybody knows, and it's just like it's pretty lame.
Yeah, and
there's
you
a lot of
you guys
money
just went to
coming
town
in
saying we're going to love people.
We're going to
get to know
people.
people.
Yep.
And you went with almost no money. I mean, our church gave you guys a little bit of money, but it wasn't much at all.
I think your
that
church
we could afford.
took an offering up and sent us with $600.
Yeah, it wasn't much, but it was what we could come up with.
That's what we had,
right?
and we were just enamored with that because it allowed us to, have a one speaker and one microphone on day one, so that I wouldn't lose my voice on day one. You know what I mean? So it's like that was what we went with, and there wasn't anything showy about it. In fact, we kind of. And it was a comment made in as a joke that we were a very unimpressive group, but we were authentic, and so that's sort of become
that's kind of stuck.
It's stuck. Like we actually have at our table on Sunday mornings, it says unimpressive but authentic, and it's like that was our heart. Like we weren't trying to impress anybody. Only Christ is impressive. And by His grace, we can love one another well. Right. But, like, don't come if you're looking for, like, Spurgeon once said, if you have to give people a circus to get them to come to church, then you have to keep giving them a circus to keep them coming to church. And we just said, that's not us.
What you win them with is what you keep them with. And it's
the gospel.
It stinks, but it's true. Yeah. So if you're winning them with excitement and riding the rides and popcorn and balloons, then you got to keep them with that.
Right.
That's right.
So I want to back up for just a second on something that's not on the list, but something that, as you were talking, that seemed to be kind of key. But real quick, Brent is joining us from Dublin.
Whatever,
so
dude.
just wanted to shout out
to
Brent.
Hope you're wearing your Crocs,
Brent.
Brent.
Hope you're not wearing your Crocs,
Brent. So when you're talking about the process and praying and preparing, and I don't want to get too into the weeds on this, but I think it's worth noting, just because I think this is maybe, and you could speak to this too, David, maybe a common thing in church planning is like there was some conflict where you were at. Kind of a, I don't know if that's the right word, but like maybe you weren't real down with like the status quo and maybe thinking there's a better way or something like that. I just kind of wonder, like, how often do churches get planted because there's some conflict, and like how is God in that scenario when there's conflict that causes somebody to, and this wasn't the entire reason at all, maybe not even a big percentage of the reason that you guys did what you did, but it was a part of it. And so I just kind of wonder how many times in church planting is it because of conflict someone says, well, I'm going to go over here and do
Did you think, Jeremy, this thing. I'm going to do this thing right. Look at these fools over here. Yeah. I'm going to go fix this problem.
No, I don't think, Chad's right in that, anytime you have a church where you have a group of men, of elders endeavoring to lead together, there's going to be differences of opinion. And sometimes I think, the big problem, the things that rise to the top as big challenges in that is differences in theology, right?
Sure.
I think that probably more times than not that's something that you have to really work through,
right?
And maybe there's a good reason to sort of split in that regard. For us, there was always conversations about, what's the best way to do this or to accomplish that, and so. Though there wasn't conflict that drove us to plant, we did have conversations that said, if we have the opportunity to start fresh, what would we bring and what would we leave? And that didn't come from a heart of conflict, but it really did come from a heart of opportunity to do things different if the opportunity presented itself.
So the conflict was a bit of an impetus to start thinking through some of those things.
It'd be weird if you didn't think that way.
Yeah, I mean...
It'd be weird if God gave you the opportunity to fill a new wineskin with something somewhere. It would be dumb not to think, okay, what have I learned that's super effective, super biblical?
Yep.
What's the stuff that needs to go to the garbage can?
Yep.
Like that has no business being in this. Like that, and it doesn't have to be arrogant. It can be just super humble and helpful for the next work.
Yeah, like I said, it didn't drive us to plant. But we had the conversations once we knew we were going.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's normal.
So it wasn't just a chip on your shoulder, but it was just...
I hope not.
No,
I did.
Because I did have some of that. I mean, I will admit, like, I definitely had, like, some arrogance and some bad... I definitely looked at certain things and went, like, this is just completely stupid. I'm going to go do this right.
Yeah.
And then I learned a million lessons,
Right.
And, that's why people do things like that.
Right.
You start having lights go off, light bulbs.
Yeah.
So you went in, so theologically you mentioned that. This is a big part of sometimes why a new work needs to be established or whatever. Did you have in your brain like your crosshairs set on a certain brand or flavor of church? We're going to be this kind of church, or were you non-denominational? Are you non-denominational?
Yep.
Okay, so you didn't go in like, we're going to be a Presbyterian church and we're going to get in with these people or get in with those people. You're just non-denominational.
We're non-denominational. Yeah, we definitely. In those conversations of who will we be, what are we going to proclaim based on what we believe to be true of the Word, we land squarely in the Reformed camp.
Okay.
If you want to label it.
Do you want to explain that? I tried doing it a couple weeks ago and I fell on my face.
The Reformed camp.
It's a big word.
It's a big word.
That's why I'm asking.
It's a misunderstood word.
Different people have different definitions of what it actually means to claim to be Reformed.
Yeah, and we found that even in our church, 5 years in. So we would say that, probably 98% of the people in our church today are Reformed. Whether they understand that they are or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But they believe in what Reformed theology teaches. But within that, we have a flavor of Dutch Reform.
Yeah.
We have a flavor of maybe Reformed Baptists, and then we have sort of maybe where just in my journey with the Lord, we have sort of that Presbyterian Reformed.
And you're all getting along?
And we're,
because those reformers can be nasty.
They can be, and
with their brand of Reformation.
And so we agree on, the essentials, and even the essentials that we would say are Orthodox Reformed, right? And so that's what allows us to move forward well together. And so, we there's a lot of things that the Calvary Chapel Church is just amazing work of God's move with getting the gospel to people, but it's kind of funny because inside the Calvary Chapel Church, and I have brothers in the Calvary Chapel Church, Chad came out of the Calvary Chapel Church, among a lot of other churches, actually. There's a lot of things that the Calvary Chapel Church is, but one thing that they will emphatically tell you they are not is Calvinistic or Reformed, right? And so here, when we moved to Madras, it was like there was a handful of us that were like, well, we're definitely Reformed and probably Reformed of the Calvinistic persuasion. And so it didn't drive us out of the church that we were in Prineville. But when we, again, had the opportunity to start new, we're going to say, as we raise up men to be elders in this church, we want to be like-minded in our theology, because as we rotate through the pulpit, there needs to be a consistent preaching of the word.
For sure.
And so we all landed in, so that's something that we said, this is essential if you're going to be an elder. You have to preach and believe and teach and lead and live in light of what we would call Reformed theology, which, to put it in just one sentence, God's on the table, man is not anywhere on the table. God is completely and totally, utterly sovereign over all things always, and we're going to read the word in light of that.
I don't know how many times, it's been a few, where I've seen a couple people partner in a gospel work or a church plant that did not have that in common, that view of God and soteriology, how one is saved.
Yep.
And the idea was great. It was just like, oh, we're going to get past that. We're going to be fine anyway. We're going to unify around the gospel. Well, it plays into every layer of the gospel.
Every layer.
And every one of those crashed after 3 or 6 months or a year because they couldn't teach the same attributes of God and character of God.
Correct.
And way that salvation functions and happens and progresses. Like they couldn't get on. They couldn't get on.
That was part of the
someone either feels
conflict.
stifled, or someone else is empowered to run with their truth. Right.
And the one who's most stifled is going to be the congregation, because they're sitting here watching this tug of war happen between the leaders.
Confusion.
Yeah, so that was part of the conflict I was alluding to, is just kind of that, like dominoes were falling in different directions with different people because of that.
Right.
And so it just caused some unrest, or what I don't know if that's the right word to say, but
good holy struggle.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of, so you talked about leadership and being on the same page. One of the things that we all have a value of, kind of a co-pastor model, plurality of elders as compared to like a Moses model where there's a guy at the top of a food chain. And so when we set out to plant the church in Madras, that was a value that we had.
Yep.
And so you had yourself as kind of boots on the ground pastor.
Yep.
And even though you had a team, you didn't have anybody else that was, an elder.
We didn't have any other elders that went. Yep.
And so you enlisted me and Tony from our church in La Pine to be kind of elders from a distance.
Yep.
Just because of the value that we
provide
had.
the head covering, the oversight, the accountability, and the shared pulpit right off the bat.
Right. So what was good and not good about that?
Yeah. There was a lot of good in that, right?
Sure.
I mean, as a single or a lone elder going out to plant a church, that's just not safe,
Right.
I think if you're a dude, like if you're a pastor and you think that you're safe in being a lone guy, I think you're in the danger zone. Like the minute you think you're safe, you're probably actually in the danger zone. Like you're not accounting for the sin nature that's still living in you, even though you're saved and you have the Holy Spirit, right? And I recognized that early, that like a value for a true plurality of elders, a shared pulpit, because there was no intention that I was going to quit my day job. This was always going to be a bivocational deal, because the point was to go and make disciples, love God, love people, knowing that a church would likely form, but that I wasn't setting out to make this a vocation. And I had no desire for that. I still don't have a desire for that. And
but your wife might for you someday.
Yeah, and we've had that conversation.
I found that out.
Yeah, we've had that conversation many times since, and if that's what the Lord would have in the future, great. But if not, I am really, really happy to be bivocational. I think there's a lot of advantage to that, actually. And so, so we started out with Chad, you, and Tony, and so for all of the reasons for accountability and head covering and headship and just having brothers that I, as a lone pastor, boots on the ground there, could lean into and lean on and really share my heart and walk through struggles that are innate, and then also ask questions of. It created an opportunity to have a shared pulpit right off the bat for the good of the congregation, so that they didn't, even though there was a few of them, right, so that they didn't become accustomed to one man, one philosophy, one idea, one personality. So we wanted to birth that from the very beginning, that this wasn't going to be about who was at the pulpit, but it was going to be about what was being said from the pulpit. And then, again, being a lone guy or a lone pastor, bivocational, with 3 kids at that point who were all under the age of 7, 8, it was like, I can't do the work of the ministry that, discipling and loving and having people in my home while also working my 50, 60-hour week day job while also preaching every Sunday. I was going to burn out really quick. And I just knew that was going to be the case. And so having a shared pulpit, good for all of those reasons, but also to give me a break from the pulpit to rest on some weeks, not have to develop a sermon, but to also be fed, to continue to be fed from other men, which was important.
Right.
Still very important.
So this is my question. So you started with a plurality. I'm going to say kind of.
Yeah, sort of.
I don't mean to.
We
kind of.
We didn't start with a local plurality.
Because almost any church, even with a Mosaic model or whatever, a Calvary model, they have a sending church, those are pastors that are covering them. That's their head covering. They can have conversations with them. They can be relieved once in a while. Or you got something like a presbytery where you can call them and you can. But those aren't boots on the ground where the plant is. Mm-hmm. And so there's only like so much true benefit of a plurality that you're actually enjoying. Like you're only getting I
was getting a taste of it.
Yeah. So like my question is, would you recommend that, or would you now going back? Would you think no, I actually want this thing in place, like one or two other dudes as we go to plant this, or would you do it the same way? I know that God's bigger than that. Don't get me wrong. I know it's not a formula, but if you. Yeah, but if you had an ideal now going through that, would it be multiple guys with you in that place?
Yeah, that was one of the questions that you guys pitched to me this morning, or last night, just hey, this is what we're thinking about. So not enough time to really think about it or overanalyze it really. What would I do different? That is one of the things that I
agree with that too.
I would never go out and do this, nor would I encourage anybody to go out and do this without a fellow elder.
Sure.
And Jason, still with us today, he came in sort of that deacon role, and he would preach, and he can preach, and I love it when he does, and the growth in that guy is just phenomenal. Thank you, Lord.
It was rad. While I'm on this, I'm going to cut in real quick. I went and visited a couple months ago. We walked in. You didn't know we were coming. We kind of
I had no idea.
Cold cocked you. Me and my wife walked in to visit the gathering, and you didn't do anything that day. I think you sat behind the soundboard.
Just during worship.
You didn't preach. You didn't do communion. You didn't and this is kind of. You would be considered the main guy as far as where this came from.
Sure.
And that you didn't.
No.
You weren't needed.
No, I wasn't needed.
And to me, that was one of the coolest things is to walk in and know who you were, and see that this whole thing went off without you having to be this personality or this thing.
Yeah.
And I thought
it's taken a while to get there. It wasn't that way from the beginning, even though we endeavored for it to be that way from the beginning. It just wasn't. And so. I think we both agree we would do that aspect differently. Again, but it's cool now, almost 5 years in, and you've been here for a little while now, not just today, but that it's kind of there where you've got some other guys that have stepped up, and you've got another elder, and you've got some guys that maybe are on the path, towards eldership, and so it's cool to see that God has blessed you guys in that way.
Yeah, for sure. And so that's been a central aim, and we part of in praying towards Madras, Chad and I spent many days talking about and praying about, and we spent more time in prayer on. We spent more time in prayer about Lord, bring future elders, bring elders. Than we prayed about anything else, quite honestly, because we knew that we needed men to be raised up locally to lead this church. Honestly, we prayed more about that than anything else. And today, now 5 years in, I have a fellow elder. And I've had another one who was with us for a short season, and then his job moved and ended up going to the Valley, and just missed that guy terribly bad. But anyway, so we have a fellow elder now, so there's two of us. Yeah. We have 3 deacons that in time we've raised up and formalized as deacons, and we have another guy who has since just in the last 3 months joined sort of that leadership core, and he's going to hang with us for the next year, and we're just going to see how it goes. And so the Lord has done that, and I think the important thing in all of that is, though it's super important to go, I think, with 2 guys, minimum 2 guys, you still don't want to rush that process.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Because we might have done that. We might have done that, and and that creates conflict that doesn't need to be there if you just take your time and slow down a little bit.
Right.
And so, so that would be one thing that I would change, but also one thing that I'm just thankful that the Lord has done is like if as he says, in the word, as we see in the book of Acts, all of the gospel being proclaimed, groups of people being saved, coming together, being the church in their communities. The one thing that's always there is pastors, pastors to lead, pastors to shepherd, pastors to preach, even probably new guys in the faith at that time, just intensive 3, 6, 7, 9, 12 months with Paul. And then it's like, okay, now I got to move on. You're the pastors, lead these sheep. You never see a church plant, you never see a group of people in the New Testament without pastors. And so we can, in our situation, it matters. The Lord did that, right? He brought men. He brought people to the church that we were able to identify and put their face against the word and say, yep, qualifications are there, theologies align, let's see in time. And he has done that. And man, I don't think my wife and I would have made it past year 4 had the Lord not done that, because in those first couple of years I was preaching 8-9 weeks in a row, and then I'd get 1 week off while trying to work, do all that stuff, and that just burns a guy out real quick.
Oh, here's the real question. How long do you preach for? What kind of burnout are we talking about here?
Well, it's,
are you an hour guy?
There's a reason that I've never been invited to preach at the door.
Just answer the question.
Because it just depends on who you ask, but I hover around the 47 to 50 mark.
Oh, okay.
The other guys that are with us, they are at they're solid 30, 35 minute guys. Okay. And I just tend to be.
Maybe we'll invite one of those guys to preach.
I tend to be. Yeah, you should. You should. So.
Yeah. Well, it's been cool to see. So, the church, not to say that it was unstable before, but you've kind of reached a level of stability where, I've stepped back as an elder now here back in February because you have enough guys, boots on the ground, that you didn't need an outsider. And so that's been kind of cool. And I was thinking about last night, since those guys have kind of been established, you and I aren't talking as much, but there was a period where we were talking pretty much daily,
every day.
On our commutes to work lined up. They don't line up anymore, but
you guys had a bromance.
No, I wouldn't go there. Because I don't wear Crocs. If I wore Crocs and he wore Crocs, I might say that.
We're unequally yoked in that regard.
Right. That was a dig for Brent, by the way, who put in the chat that he still likes Crocs. So anyway, I digress.
Brent, you're
but anyway,
my bro.
we were talking a lot, and
every day.
It was beneficial to both of us. And one thing I want to point out, and I don't, maybe I've told you this, I don't know, but kind of early on, I would throw a lot of kind of my church situations at you to help train you as a pastor. I'd be like, here's what I'm dealing with. What do you think about this? More just to give you opportunity to speak into things that I knew at some point, you were going to be dealing with yourself. But what ended up happening, you pastored me as much as I pastored you, through all of that. And it has been really cool to,
praise the Lord,
be able to kind of share pastoral war stories together and help each other walk through, those kinds of things. And so it was a two-way benefit, I guess, is my point. It wasn't, just one person benefiting another, and it continues to be a two-way benefit as well. But it's just been neat to see what God, has done in establishing the church, establishing men, establishing leaders, and to see the trajectory that, of what you guys have going on, and to see that the guys that we have prayed for years, without knowing who they were, right, are there.
They're there
God
today.
has brought them, and so that's been just a super cool thing to see.
It has been cool.
Yeah.
And speaking of war stories, I think that's an important thing to talk about too. As you're going out to, church plant, there's a lot of life that happens, and I mean we see in the Word again that that we're working against the devil, right? Against Satan in this, and so there's a lot of, our own sin gets us into trouble, but he's also working against us in that, and it just in war stories, about 2 years ago, I ended up in a place where I was really struggling, and I wasn't being as vocal about it as I needed to be, and And I started to sort of kind of go inside as opposed to just keeping it who I am and what I'm walking in just out visible on the table in front of my brothers. And I was getting worn out, beat down, and in that fall into the own temptation of some of my own sin battles, right? And speaking of war stories, it finally came to fruition, and Chad came up, and he brought a couple of those guys in our church, that are there, and they sat me down, and they were just brutally honest with me, and I didn't appreciate it as much in the moment. I needed about 48 hours to settle in with it, but it's like they, they sat me down, and they're like, bro, like, you need to watch your backside, because you're starting to head in a trajectory that's not going to go well for you, for your family, which I appreciated. They focused on me and my family. And then the church was the third, but you're a pastor, so there's implications for the church here and the testimony of the gospel and all of that. But me, my family, and the church, and they came around me and they said, we think it's time that you take a break. Like, you need some rest, and you need a season to be pastored. And they did it in love, and we walked before the body, our body in Madras, in that, and just kept everything open and above board. And the church responded in kind, in love, and in grace, and said, wow, we can look at the last 3 years, and though we don't condone, that you're going down a path that's not going to end well, we can see that, you need some time. And they loved me well. The body loved me well, and Chad and those brothers at the table loved me well, and being willing to see that and then step in and get control of it, And without that, I have no doubt that I was on a trajectory that, maybe would have required a sort of sit down for a long season, maybe for forever, right? And so when we talk about the need for plurality and fellow brothers, and pastors are not above sin,
Pastors need to be pastored.
Pastors need to be pastored, and this whole idea of church planting, 5 to 7 years in, it's a grueling thing.
Yeah.
And
we see it more today too. We see these guys going out, and there's a lot of pressure on them. Some of it they put on themselves or whatever, just because of what it looks like to plant a church, and what it looks like to be a successful church, and what it looks like to be a big personality, and what it looks like to keep what you've built. And you start to feel the weight of that. We see guys dropping off, and the only way that I'm still here 12 years into this church plant is because of the co-equal framework. There's no way. There's times where I go through seasons in my life that are challenging, and I let them know, and they go, sit down, we'll take it from here. And I'm just pastored, and the church doesn't miss a beat, and I actually get what I need. Because you're absolutely right. We're storming like beachheads of Satan.
We are.
Right? Right? And there's no way one guy's going to be able to storm that beach. He's going to get cut down. I mean, he needs a medic next to him. He needs an engineer next to him. Like, we need those other people to get us up the beach, right, to establish a post. And a plurality does that. So
plurality does that.
Well, it's worth noting, too, that, by the time we got to what you're talking about, God had done through you all, the building of a church, the building of a community, really. A
community of people.
You guys right out of the gate had a strong value of, just community and lives connected, and those kinds of things. All of the things that we've talked about in the podcast up to this point factored into the scenario that you're talking about, and the church didn't crumble.
No.
Because a guy at the top of a food chain, had to take a break for a little while. The church maybe even flourished.
It did flourish
through that,
in many ways.
And you were loved, and it's just all. It's just worth noting that because of all the things that we've talked about with churches today, factored into that circumstance of your church loving you at a time when you especially needed it, and it didn't crumble, it didn't falter, it didn't even really miss a beat at all.
Yeah, and I'm thankful to the Lord too, and just not only in how it all worked out and all of that, but in light of that, the church got to see what it really looks like to be a gritty people together. And oftentimes, things that the grittiness at the pastoral level is kept from the body.
Right.
It is kept sort of under the table or behind the curtain.
Yep.
And so we're always projecting a better version of ourselves.
Right.
And at least in the American church, I think that's
And
the way it is.
believers, congregants do that too.
And
Right.
congregants,
Definitely leaders, but definitely.
Right.
everybody does it.
I feel
to
like we're
some
the
level.
first ones, though, that should set the tone
Right.
to show that it's okay
Yeah.
Yeah.
to be transparent.
It's okay to not be okay.
And you did that too. That Sunday,
Well,
I
that
was
was
there
super hard.
where, you just in a really courageous moment,
Yeah,
stood before the church and said, here's my struggle.
Yeah.
And the church surrounded you and loved you. And
Yeah.
I mean,
and that
it
was
was,
Christ in me, Christ in them.
Right.
Right. But it showed the authenticity and the grittiness.
was. It
I mean,
was
when you
super
think about
authentic.
the Corinthian church, right? Holy moly, just a gritty people, grimy.
Yeah.
And
They were gnarly.
it's okay. Like that's the gospel transforms all of it. The gospel covers it all.
Well, it's one thing to preach like Jesus is the best thing about me, but it's another thing to actually
to prove
show it in the moment
yeah.
Yeah.
where it's real. Like,
Yeah.
like I'm telling you right now, like look at this. Look at me.
Yeah.
Jesus is the best thing about me.
Yeah.
And I really think that does a lot for a church
Yeah.
to not just hear that, but to see that from time to time. And obviously,
Yeah.
we don't want people to come to a place of complete desperation.
Right.
You know what I mean? But the truth is we will.
Yeah.
We
Like
will,
the church
right.
will,
Sure.
and even your pastors will
And your
sometimes.
pastors will, right?
Come to a
Yeah.
place where all you have is Christ, and
Yep.
Jesus is the best thing about you because you're just so ugly. You have nothing to put on that day. You
Right.
have no makeup to put on.
That's right.
Yeah.
You have no comb to comb your hair with. Like you just are. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And Christ is the best thing about us. So
That's right.
It's been rad to see you. It's been rad because I, from a distance, have watched you go, kind of through that hard point, but then come out of it and see like Chad said, like the church. I would say, from what I see, even stronger than it was before as
Yeah.
a result
It
of
is.
everybody walking through that. Like it's actually like solidified and
Yep.
codified, like the core group
Yep.
of believers there. And I just love guys like you, man, that that go down swinging.
Yeah.
that won't stop, that won't stay down. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like the calling of God is evident in you, and even just going off to a place that's kind of weird and planning a church and whatnot is just rad. You know,
Yeah.
I'd love to see more men like you, and being bivocational. Shout out to that too.
Yeah.
Because most
Right
dudes there's a formula like it has to look like this if I'm going to do this, and so we make it an occupation. If it's not an occupation or a career, we don't go do the things that God has put us on earth for, and we need to get over that. That's sissy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is non-sissy stuff where you're going to go out, you're going to work hard, whatever you need to do to pay your bills and take care of your family, but you're also going to make sure you don't neglect the things of God. And it's just so cool, dude. It's so rad to see that God's still making people like you.
I read, I think it was in, if I'm remembering right, Strzok's book on biblical eldership.
Yeah.
There was a part where he talks about like he's seen men in their spare time, go do things like, build a house.
Yeah.
In their off hours and things like that. But he's like, the call of an elder is like, your spare time is, building the kingdom.
Yep.
And that's what you've been doing. And, it's been, an honor to be part of it and to do it alongside you. And even if from a distance, and it's been really cool.
Yeah. And Madras is at a gain, by what God's done through the gathering and bringing you guys there. There's a gospel gain deposit in that city as a result of you guys. So we definitely pray for you guys. We love what you're doing. If you're in the Madras area, I always tell people, I know where you need to go.
Yeah.
There's a place right over here. So.
Well, and we love being able to be, we're all non-denominational and non-denom, but we love having fellow, and not that we call them sister churches, but we know, our body knows through Chad's time there, and that the guys that have come up to the table, as deacons and elders, like they know that like our sister church, if it's formal like that, is the Door, Sun River, and the Door, Lapine, and like-minded brothers, just with the same aim, the same philosophy, so to speak, so it's nice too to know that we're not alone in Madras.
For sure.
That we have fellow brothers and fellow churches that are doing the exact same thing in other communities very near to us, and so that's been an immense blessing to us. I know personally for me, I couldn't have done it without Chad, your support, and just being able to come down and hang with you and Brent, and in those times, those are always refreshing times. But I know that there are brothers outside of Madras that also have my back, and that have the back of our church. If we ever came to a day where it was just like, I know that there's men locally, regionally, that we'll get that support from and help from, and my hope is that you guys too will feel the same from us at some point.
Absolutely, and maybe, Lord willing, we can all plant a church together somewhere sometime.
Well, dude, now we're talking.
Yeah.
Is this we got to shut the camera off now?
No.
Let's get started on that.
All right.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, we are at time, but like any kind of final thoughts from either of you guys on this?
I kind of already put my final thoughts out there. Yeah.
I would say that everything that you need to know about church planting is right here. And everything else, every other book that you would read, every other philosophy that you'd listen to, anything else is just secondary. Like, really focus on the book of Acts. Like, that's the church planting model, I think. And trust the Lord. Like, it's his church. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. Like, he will equip, he will give you everything that you need. And you don't even have to spend a lot of time praying about it. You've already been commissioned, Matthew 28.
Yeah.
And as you go, the Lord will come around you and bring other folks around you to do that work. So just like, there are communities that need Bible preaching churches. And, is there a point where a community can have too many of those? I don't think so, because I think a lot of small churches across one community can be just as impactful, perhaps more impactful than one mega church in a community. And so it's not for sissies, but Christ isn't a sissy.
There you go.
But Christ isn't a sissy, and he's the one that's going to do it. You're just going to be the vessel that he uses as you go out and do it.
Yeah.
So.
I think a lot of times we ask the question, why? Like, why should I go do this? When maybe the better question is, why shouldn't I go do this?
Yeah.
Right. Especially when it comes to church planting. To your point, I don't think we usually need to spend a whole lot of time wrestling with, should I let's just go do it. And because we know that God has commanded us to go make disciples, and out of that churches will rise up. So anyway, just some encouragement to maybe some people that might be tuned in on the fence about, whether to plant a church or not. Go do it.
Yeah. Hit me up. Happy to answer any questions. The Gathering at Madras, you can find us online. We do have a website. You can find us there. But, happy to share all the good and the struggles.
Yeah.
So
anything that we can pray for specifically for you guys?
We're coming up on our 5-year, and so with the 5-year, we're no longer in our home. We're in a building. We've been there for about a year now, or we've been there for about 4 years now, and we're growing, and we have maybe 60 people in the body now. Probably a third of those are kids under 5, and so, which is awesome, and we have people that are 70 plus, so we really run the gamut in that regard. But we're starting to feel those growing pains of space.
Sure.
And the question before us at our elder table and with the deacons is, do we go get a bigger building? We financially, we're not ready to do that, or do we stay with what the Lord has provided right now and start to go, maybe we need to split into 2. Like, we're not there yet, but we're going like.
Hey, right. I know a book that speaks to this.
Yeah.
So it starts with an A.
Yeah, Acts. And so just prayer about how we would move forward in the next 5 years as the Lord has continued to grow this little church in Madras. We're at that 5-year point. We're starting to feel the growing pains, the good things, and we just want to walk in wisdom and with clarity as to how to move forward in that.
Yeah. Well, let's pray for you guys, and then we can call it a day. Father, we're thankful this morning just that Jeremy could join us and talk about just the work that you have been doing in their community. Thankful for all that you've done, all the things that you've taught us in this process, but more than that, thankful that there's a solid Bible preaching church, gospel-centered church in the community of Madras, and that people are connected to it, and that people are growing in their faith, and that the community is being infiltrated with the gospel through their efforts. And so just pray that you give them wisdom as they look to the future and kind of next steps, and that they look at things like buildings and space and those types of things, that you would help them to have wisdom in that, but also not to lose just their endeavor to infiltrate the community and shine the light of the gospel. And so just pray for continued growth, pray that people would continue to come to know you, that people's faith would be strengthened, and that you would continue to grow just the leadership there at the church. And we just look forward to hearing in the future about just the work that you're continuing to do. And so we're thankful for it, and we ask all this in Christ's name. Amen.
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 Thanks for joining us, Steve.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have you back again sometime.
Would love it. Thank you.
At year 7.
Year 7. Yeah.
Maybe before that.